Oh, Lord. The power got cut. Oh, man. Okay, the power got cut. I'm going to need a backup battery for streaming. Please put out on your social media or somehow let people know that we're back on. And I'm going to send this out on Twitter too. Okay, has anyone come in? Got one person watching. It might be me. One person. Hello, Meatwolf. Thank you for becoming a member. Okay, Reg is here. All right. The power just spazzed. I don't know. So clearly I'm going to need a backup generator or something like that. What was that? It was, I don't know. Like, I think I've just got too much. I've got so much gear running on this power circuit that the power fritzed in this part of the house. And I was offline long enough for YouTube to end the previous stream, so I couldn't rejoin it, unfortunately, which really sucks. And I hope that everyone who was watching the last one finds this one. In fact, let me post it maybe in the comments. All right, I'm posting it to the comments of the old video too. It's them damn Illuminati. They don't want me spilling the beans on whatever it is I happen to be spilling the beans on right now. Hello. All right, well, I think this raises a larger point. So let's just, there's a few people here, so let's, yeah, God's mad. Okay. Well, there's a few people here, so let me ask this. What do you think? Is it necessary, or is it important even, for religious figures or stories from the past to have actually happened? Is it important whether or not there was a Moses to the fact that Judaism has been stable and consistent for 5,000 years? Does whether Jesus actually existed or not, does that relate at all to, or does that have anything to do with whether, does that actually matter? For instance, Christianity, does the historical Jesus matter as much as, like, let's say, the egregore of Jesus? What's up, everyone? That we could say, like in magic, it's like, we know the idea of egregores, which is a thought form created by a large group of people, which can be so powerful that it acts almost as if it has independent existence. We've created tons in the modern world. Superheroes are a good example, right? Or, you could argue that things like COVID is an egregore. I'm not saying that COVID isn't an actual virus, but there's also like all the thoughts and stress and stuff that goes into that idea from everyone, where now it's like a god people are hiding from. Or an angry demon, right? And this type of thinking is core. This is magical thinking, or it's advanced magical thinking. It's core to magic. So my question to you is it actually important whether the stories in these books are literally true or not? And is it actually important whether these people literally existed or not? And I'll wait to hear from you in the comments. Yeah, Septimus Grimes says plenty of fictional stories have lessons to teach. I mean, yeah, like I was just reading Daredevil comics and I felt like a little bit of a better person because I was focusing on heroism and thinking about the concept of heroism. Daredevil never existed in reality. Does it matter? No, it doesn't, right? So Paul says it's irrelevant. The egregore is what affects the consciousness of the populace. And Meatwolf says egregore could actually be more powerful than just a historical figure alone. I agree with you. I think so. I agree with both of you. So in a way, have you seen, okay, Has anyone seen The Last Temptation of Christ? One of my favorite movies of all time. It's a beautiful movie that for me was a great movie about faith and instilled me with a sense of faith, but the Catholic Church hated it and protested it because they considered it blasphemous. So if you haven't seen it, close your ears real quick because this is a spoiler. Meatwolf says it was important to me growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, but now... And Reg says the wisdom is what matters. So there's a great scene in the end of that movie, and I'll try, spoiler alert, but in the end of the movie, Christ is given a temptation by the devil where he's allowed to escape the crucifixion and see what happens after the crucifixion. Okay. At one point, he meets Paul, and Christ is played by Willem Dafoe. It's one of the all-time great performances. I really love spiritual movies. Okay, Meatwolf, close your ears or just turn this part off if you're going to watch it. So he's played by Willem Dafoe, who has the great, the great theater range to have played both Jesus and the Green Goblin. He meets Paul, St. Paul, who's played by the great and eminent Harry Dean Stanton. And he comes upon Paul preaching at the beginning of his ministry to all these people, and he's telling them all these stories about Jesus and what he did, and he died, and he was resurrected for your sins, and all this, and he's Son of God, and all that. And when it's over, Christ goes up to him, and it's a random person to Paul, and he says, "Nothing you're saying is true." And Paul says, and Paul says, "Well, who are you to say?" And he says, "I'm Jesus Christ. I'm still alive, and everything you're saying is a lie." And Paul says to him, "It doesn't matter. I don't care if you're the real Christ. It doesn't matter if you are or not. And if you are, I wish I'd never met you, and I want nothing to do with you, because these people that I'm telling the story to used to have no hope. Now they have hope. Now they believe in something, and you would take that away from them. You would take their Savior away from them." And I think it's a profound, profound scene. Almost as profound as David Bowie playing Pontius Pilate, which is phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. But I think that movie, you got to see that movie. It's great. But that says kind of a lot right there. It says a lot. Where it's like, even if to him in that scene, even if Christ existed, is also irrelevant because Christ, the man, doesn't matter. Christ, the idea, now that matters. And even if you go to esoteric readings of the New Testament, and I'm not saying I believe this one way or the other, okay? But I'm just sharing. Even if you go to the esoteric interpretations of the New Testament, you'll see things like Jesus, the man, capacitated Christ, the energy. I think that's like a Rudolf Steiner reading of it. So in a way, that also says that the physical man doesn't matter. What seems to matter in this context is the hopes and expectations of the congregation, which also goes in line with the Christian teaching that the third temple is the Christian, is Christendom. Right? It's the church, which of course Jews do not believe. So, and we can get into the whole story of the temple, because basically the entire Bible is not a story about Moses and Jesus. The Bible is a story about the building and destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. That's the central spine of the biblical narrative is the temple in Jerusalem, which is now currently Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it was the temple on the mount, and Dome of the Rock and all of this. So, it gets spicy. So these things that I'm putting out there, I'm not telling you to think one way or another. What I'm doing is highlighting whether it's this or people interpreting religious texts literally versus non-literally, or interpreting violent parts literally or not literally. What I'm presenting here is like the sticking points with religion, the unresolvable paradoxes, which lay beneath so much of our experience of reality because they're unresolvable. And so I'm pointing to problems that essentially have no solution and simply calling your awareness to them and saying, isn't that interesting that so much of our culture hinges on on some of these paradoxical readings of history or of religious interpretation, or to be very glib, perhaps we could say that the world is a kind of eternal war between those who can think metaphorically and those who can't. Might be the easiest way to say it. All right, tell you what, let's wrap it up. Let's read the last bit of this. Well, let's see. Fuck it. I want people back on this stream, so let's do all of it, actually. We don't have much more. So he's talking about the New Testament. As the historical parts of the New Testament, so far as concerns Jesus Christ, are confined to a very short space of time, less than 2 years and all within the same country, and nearly to the same spot, the discordance of time, place, and circumstance, which detects the fallacy of the books of the Old Testament and proves them to be impositions, cannot be expected to be found here in the same abundance. The New Testament, compared with the Old, is like a farce of one act, in which there is not room for very numerous violations of the unities. There are, however, some glaring contradictions, which, exclusive of the fallacy of the pretended prophecies, are sufficient to show the story of Jesus Christ to be false. Again, I'm not saying whether I believe this or not. I'm simply giving this to you for historical context. I lay it down as a position which cannot be controverted. First, that the agreement of all the parts of a story does not prove that story to be true, because the parts may agree and the whole may be false. Secondly, that the disagreement of the parts of a story proves the whole cannot be true. The agreement does not prove true, but the disagreement proves falsehood positively. The history of Jesus Christ is contained in the 4 books ascribed to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The first chapter of Matthew begins with giving a genealogy of Jesus Christ, and in the 3rd chapter of Luke, there is also given a genealogy of Jesus Christ. Did those two agree? It would not prove the genealogy to be true, because it might, God damn, the pedanticness. Like all of these things he's talking about, okay, they disagree on his genealogy, therefore some of them have to be lying. No, they may just not be sharing the same information, and they're probably we're communicating in a low information environment where, as far as I know, the books of the New Testament were written at least 70 years after the death of Christ. So what we may be looking at here is not blatant lying as much as just simply inevitable information loss and information decay, which is inevitable. Information even decays on digital media is subject to bit rot. Digital media decays, has a decay rate. And that's why you need backups of backups and all of this. So, yes, Eric, the part 1 should now be on the live tab of the YouTube. So I've got floppy disks from the early 80s, right? When I used them on a Commodore 64, where those were widely used by everyone, the 5-inch ones. You can't even get a thing to read those now. You have to go to a specialized lab with hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment to try to retrieve information off of those, outside of finding the original computer and rebooting it, right? So, and that's just, we're talking about the early 80s. Talk about before floppy disks, things used to be on tape reels on computers. Good luck getting information off of a computer tape reel from 1970. Good luck, right? So information has a half-life just like everything else. So I'm not willing to attribute that to maliciousness. Yeah, so here he gets, it's just, okay, we got another table. He keeps getting more and more pedantic. Let's just tell you what, we'll just skip to his conclusion, which I think is the best part of the book anyways. And if you want to go read his proofs, go ahead. All right. Chapter 3, the conclusion. In the former part of the Age of Reason, I have spoken of the three frauds, mystery, miracle, and prophecy, and as I have seen nothing in any of the answers to that work that in the least affects what I have there said upon those subjects, I shall not encumber this second part with additions that are not necessary. I've spoken also in the same work upon what is called revelation, and have shown the absurd misapplication of that term to the books of the Old Testament and the New. For certainly a revelation is out of the question in reciting anything of which man has been the actor or the witness. That which a man has done or seen needs no revelation to tell him he has done it or seen it, for he knows it already, nor to enable him to tell it or to write it. It is ignorance or imposition to apply the term revelation in such cases, yet the Bible and Testament are classed under this fraudulent description of being all revelation. Revelation, then, so far as the term has relation between God and man, can only be applied to something which God reveals of his will to man, but though the power of the Almighty to make such a communication is necessarily admitted, because to that power all things are possible, yet the thing so revealed, if anything ever was revealed, and which, by the by, it is impossible to prove, is revelation to the person only to whom it is made. His account of it to another person is not revelation, and whoever puts faith in that account puts it in the man from whom the account comes, and that man may have been deceived, or may have dreamed it, or he may be an impostor and may lie. There is no possible criterion whereby to judge of the truth of what he tells, for even the morality of it would be no proof of revelation. In all such cases, the proper answer would be, when it is revealed to me, I will believe it to be a revelation. But it is not, and cannot be incumbent upon me to believe it to be revelation before. Neither is it proper that I should take the word of man as the word of God, and put man in the place of God. This is the manner in which I have spoken of revelation in the former part of the Age of Reason, and which, while it reverentially admits revelation as a possible thing, because, as before said, to the Almighty all things are possible, it prevents the imposition of one man upon another, and precludes the wicked use of pretended revelation. But though speaking for myself, I thus admit the possibility of revelation, I totally disbelieve that the Almighty ever did communicate anything to man by any mode of speech in any language, or by any kind of vision or appearance, or by any means which our senses are capable of receiving, otherwise than by the universal display of himself in the works of the creation, and by that repugnance we feel in ourselves to bad actions, and the disposition to do good ones. The most detestable wickedness, the most horrid cruelties, and the greatest miseries that have afflicted the human race have had their origin in this thing called revelation, or revealed religion. It has been the most dishonorable belief against the character of the divinity, the most destructive to morality and the peace and happiness of man that ever was propagated since man began to exist. It is better, far better, that we admitted, if it were possible, 1,000 devils to roam at large, and to preach publicly the doctrine of devils. Don't be careful what you wish for, because that actually happened. If there were any such, it's called internet occultists. If there were any such, and that we permitted one such impostor and monster as Moses, Joshua, Samuel, and the Bible prophets to come with the pretended world of God in his mouth and have credit among us. Whence arose all the horrid assassinations of whole nations of men, women, and infants, with which the Bible is filled, and the bloody persecutions and tortures unto death and religious wars, that since that time have laid Europe in blood and ashes. Whence rose they but from this impious thing called revealed religion, and this monstrous belief that God has spoken to man? The lies of the Bible have been the cause of the one, and the lies of the Testament of the other. Some Christians pretend that Christianity was not established by the sword, but of what period of time do they speak? It was impossible that 12 men could begin with the sword. They had not the power, but no sooner were the professors of Christianity sufficiently powerful to employ the sword than they did so, and the stake and bundle of sticks, too, and Mahomet could not do it sooner. True. Muhammad, as soon as he got that vision, he came down from the mountain and started chopping heads. By the same spirit that Peter cut off the ear of the high priest's servant, if the story be true, he would have cut off his head and the head of his master, had he been able. Besides this, Christianity founds itself originally upon the Bible, and the Bible was established altogether by the sword, and that in the worst use of it, not to terrify, but to extirpate. The Bible is the sire of the Testament, and both are called the Word of God. The Christians read both books, the ministers preach from both books, and this thing called Christianity is made up of both. It is then false to say that Christianity was not established by the sword. The only sect that is not persecuted are the Quakers, and the only reason that can be given for is that they are rather deists than Christians. They do not believe much about Jesus Christ, and they call the scriptures a dead letter. Had they called them by a worse name, they had been nearer the truth. Okay, so this is interesting also. So yeah, a couple points. One is context, like causation or correlation. Causation or correlation. So we're talking about one religious group in the ancient Middle East and then the Middle Ages. Okay, the problem is, okay, again, how about the other guys? Because let's just take the Middle Ages, right? Because I know a lot more about the Middle Ages. People love to harp on the Crusades in the Middle Ages. What they forget is mommy vlogger voice. Nice try. Okay, we got to restart it. We'll put it down to 5 super chats. Okay. We'll put it down to 5 super chats. All right. So if you want mommy blogger readings, there you have it. And thank you to those who've contributed so far. Oh boy. What happened to me? Are you Timo? Jesus, what the hell happened to you? Let me save you some typing. Are you disappointed in me? Are you so disappointed? Get the fuck out. All right. So Shebrew says Europe was at war before Christianity too, though. Yeah, and the Middle East was probably exactly the same, right? Because the Egyptian, like the whole history, like let's talk about let's talk about both. So Middle Ages, you have the Crusades. The Crusades were in response to jihad. If you look at other cultures like Tibet, for instance, you see all the same torture and violence. Even in Tibet, you had the Mongol raiders, one of the most violent periods in world history, which slaughtered like a quarter of the world population. That had jack shit to do with anything Abrahamic, right? And compared to that, the violence of both the Crusades and jihad was as nothing. So there's that. It's causation or correlation, right? Meaning, was it the religion causing that, or was that just the world around them? Now, the counter to, and let's also talk about the Middle Ages, or excuse me, the Middle East. So we have the accounts of violence in the Old Testament. Okay, but now we have the historical record. The Sumerians were mass murdered and their religions appropriated by the Akkadians. And the Akkadians were mass murdered and their religions appropriated by the Babylonians, who then took the Jews as slaves. And I believe the Babylonians were then mass murdered and had their shit taken to some extent by the Egyptians, who then also took the Jews as slaves. So to single out one group here outside of context is a little disingenuous. You've got to see the context of the area. Same thing with the Middle Ages, right? Now, I can already hear the counter coming to that, which is, well, Jason, how come you're willing to make that distinction between causation and correlation with Judaism and Christianity versus Islam, where somebody could clearly say, well, if there's violence in Islam, of course, people will then say, well, what about American imperialism? What about Israel? All of this, right? The reason I don't do that with Islam is because a couple reasons. One is Islam isn't just a religion. You need to understand this. Islam is also a civil code. It's a political system. And the political system, whatever, you could take out Muhammad, you could take out the Quran, doesn't matter. You can just look at what they're doing now, right? You don't have to worry about their justification about it. Imams and religious clerics and the Ayatollah and all these people are actively inciting people to violence all over the world, and that has consequences practically every single day and every single week. I'm going to read to you these massacres that are happening now, not 5,000 years ago, not in the Middle Ages, now, right? You don't see that behavior from other groups. And if you do, you absolutely do not see it at that scale. That's why I make that distinction, because in the case of Islam, you can absolutely draw causation because they are literally, regularly, and consistently, globally calling for violence, right? Is it all Muslims? No. But show me the Muslims who condemn the violence. You're going to have a hard time. So, there we go. That's kind of my take on that. So that's my counter argument to Paine there. It's kind of like, well, you got to take this in context too. And I agree with Shebrew, who says, I mean, well, what about, basically Europe was at war before Christianity. Yeah. So, and, people like to talk about the violence of colonization. Okay, but North America was at war before European colonization, right? The Aztecs slaughtered the Maya before Americans ever even came here. So, and that's definitely a human sacrifice culture. Okay. The other point I wanted to make is he starts bigging up the Quakers. Whether you're aware of this or not, American liberalism is essentially post-Christian. So American liberalism is more or less the ethics of Christianity without the religious framework, and unfortunately without the forgiveness, as you may have noticed looking around these days. But that model of the American progressive left is from Quakerism, right? And you can draw a direct through line from Quakerism to, for instance, the anti-war movements in the 1960s and many of the beliefs of liberals now. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I'm saying that, again, he's bigging up the Quakers, and that also has historical consequence later and demonstrates where American spiritual thinking was at the beginning of the country. All right. It is incumbent on every man who reverences the character of the Creator and who wishes to lessen the catalog of artificial miseries and remove the cause that has sown persecutions thick among mankind to expel all ideas of revealed religion as a dangerous heresy and an impious fraud. What is that we have learned from this pretended thing called revealed religion? It should be, what is it? What is it that we have learned from this pretended thing called revealed religion? Nothing that is useful to man, and everything that is dishonorable to his maker. What is it that the Bible teaches us? Rapine, cruelty, and murder. It doesn't only teach that. And it doesn't teach that either. It says, thou shalt not murder. So okay. What is it the Testament teaches us? To believe that the Almighty committed debauchery with a woman engaged to be married, and the belief of this debauchery is called faith. Okay. Again, if you take it literally, whereas the entire ancient world is filled with stories of the congress between God, the gods, and man, and what may appear a literally absurd story on the top may appear totally different underneath, right? When you look at it metaphorically. So, yeah. I'll give my thoughts at the end. As to the fragments of morality that are irregularly and thinly scattered in these books, they make no part of this pretended thing, revealed religion. They are the natural dictates of conscience and the bonds by which society is held together, and without which it cannot exist, and are nearly the same in all religions and in all societies. The Testament teaches nothing new upon this subject, and where it attempts to exceed, it becomes mean and ridiculous. The doctrine of not retaliating injuries is much better expressed in Proverbs, which is a collection as well from the Gentiles as the Jews, than it is in the Testament. It is there said, Proverbs 25, verse 21, if thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. But when it's said, as in the Testament, if a man smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also, it is assassinating the dignity of forbearance and sinking man into a spaniel. Well, I agree with him on that. Loving of enemies is another dogma of feigned morality and has, besides, no meaning. It is incumbent on man as a moralist that he does not revenge an injury, and it is equally as good in a political sense, for there is no end to retaliation. Each retaliates on the other and calls it justice. But to love in proportion to the injury, if it could be done, would be to offer a premium for crime. That I agree with. Besides, the word enemies is too vague and general to be used in a moral maxim, which ought always to be clear and defined like a proverb. That also I agree with. If a man be the enemy of another from mistake and prejudice, as in the case of religious opinions and sometimes in politics, that man is different to an enemy at heart with a criminal intention. And it is incumbent upon us, and it contributes also to our own tranquility, that we put the best construction upon a thing that it will bear. But even this erroneous motive in him makes no motive for love on the other part, and to say that we can love voluntarily and without a motive is morally and physically impossible. Morality is injured by prescribing to it duties that in the first place are impossible to be performed, and if they could be, would be productive of evil, or, as before said, be premiums for crime. The maxim of doing as we would be done unto does not include this strange doctrine of loving enemies, for no man expects to be loved himself for his crime or for his enmity. Those who preach this doctrine of loving their enemies are in general the greatest persecutors. I also agree with that. And they act consistently by so doing, for the doctrine is hypocritical, and it is natural that hypocrisy should act the reverse of what it preaches. For my own part, I disown the doctrine and consider it a feigned or fabulous morality. Yet, so this doctrine of loving your enemies, okay, so this is obviously critical to current events right now, right? Because you have America and Europe, which are Christian or post-Christian, basically telling Israel, why don't you act like this, even though we don't, and we're being hypocritical. We don't act like that at all. But it's easy enough to be like, when it's somebody else, right? Whereas there is no such ethic in Judaism. Because by and large, survival's a whole lot more important when you're that, when everyone's on your ass like that, right? And I have a lot of respect for that. And the whole turn the other cheek thing, well, nobody actually does it. And a lot of times when they do, it becomes absurd. For instance, if somebody comes to your house to kill your family and you turn the other cheek, well, you're complicit in the crime now. That's how I see it. Okay. For my own part, I disown the doctrine and consider it as a feigned or fabulous morality, yet the man does not exist that can say, I have persecuted him, or any man, or any set of men, either in the American Revolution or in the French Revolution, or that I have in any case returned evil for evil. But it is not incumbent on man to reward a bad action with a good one, or to return good for evil, and wherever it is done, it is a voluntary act and not a duty. It is also absurd to suppose that such doctrine can make any part of a revealed religion. We imitate the moral character of the Creator by forbearing with each other, for he forbears with all. But this doctrine would imply that he loved man, not in proportion as he was good, but as he was bad. If we consider the nature of our condition here, we must see there is no occasion for such a thing as revealed religion. What is it we want to know? Does not the creation, the universe we behold, preach to us the existence of an almighty power that governs and regulates the whole? And is not the evidence that this creation holds out to our senses infinitely stronger than anything we can read in a book that any impostor might make and call the Word of God? As for morality, the knowledge of it exists in every man's conscience. You'd think, but not really. Here we are. The existence of an almighty power is sufficiently demonstrated to us, though we cannot conceive, as it is impossible we should, the nature and manner of its existence. We cannot conceive how we came here ourselves, and yet we know for a fact that we are here. We must know also that the power that called us into being can, if he pleases, and when he pleases, call us to account for the manner in which we have lived here, and therefore, without seeking any other motive for the belief, it is rational to believe that he will, for we know beforehand that he can. The probability or even possibility of the thing is all that we ought to know, for if we knew it as a fact, we should be the mere slaves of terror, our belief would have no merit, and our best actions no virtue. Deism, then, teaches us, without the possibility of being deceived, all that is necessary or proper to be known. The creation is the Bible of the deist. He there reads in the handwriting of the Creator himself the certainty of his existence and the immutability of his power, and all other Bibles and testaments are to him forgeries. The probability that we may be called to account hereafter will, to a reflecting mind... two more super chats. Thank you, Jay and Meatwolf. The probability or even possibility of the thing is all that we ought to know, for if we knew it as a fact, we should be the mere slaves of terror. Our belief would have no merit, and our best actions no virtue. Deism then teaches us, without the possibility of being deceived, all that is necessary or proper to be known. We reread that, okay. The probability that we may be called to account hereafter will to a reflecting mind have the influence of belief, for it is not our belief or our disbelief that can make or unmake the fact. As this is the state we are in which it is proper we should be in, as free agents, it is the fool only, and not the philosopher or even the prudent man, that would live as if there were no God. But the belief of a God is so weakened by being mixed with the strange fable of the Christian creed, and with the wild adventures related in the Bible, and of the obscurity and obscene nonsense of the Testament, that the mind of man is bewildered as in a fog. Viewing all these things in a confused mass, he confounds fact with fable, and as he cannot believe all, he feels a disposition to reject all. But the belief of a God is a belief distinct from all other things, and ought not to be confounded with any. The notion of a trinity of gods has enfeebled the belief of one God. A multiplication of beliefs acts as a division of belief, and in proportion as anything is divided, it is weakened. Religion, by such means, becomes a thing of form instead of fact, of notion instead of principles. Morality is banished to make room for an imaginary thing called faith, and this faith has its origin in a supposed debauchery. A man is preached instead of a God. An execution is an object for gratitude. The preachers daub themselves with blood like a troop of assassins and pretend to admire the brilliancy it gives them. They preach a humdrum sermon on the merits of the execution, then praise Jesus Christ for being executed and condemn the Jews for doing it. Yeah, that never made sense to me. A man, by hearing all this nonsense lumped and preached together, confounds the God of the creation with the imagined God of the Christians and lives as if there were none. Of all the systems of religion that ever were invented, there is none more derogatory to the Almighty, more unedifying to man, more repugnant to reason, and more contradictory in itself than this thing called Christianity. Too absurd for belief, too impossible to convince, and too inconsistent for practice, it renders the heart torpid or produces only atheists and fanatics. As an engine of power, it serves the purpose of despotism, and as a means of wealth, the avarice of priests. But so far as respects the good of man in general, it leads to nothing here or hereafter. The only religion that has not been invented and that has in it every evidence of divine originality is pure and simple deism. I'm actually quite shocked that he becomes purely sectarian here as well after all of this. He straight up says deism is the one true religion, which is rather ironic. It must have been the first and will probably be the last that man believes. But pure and simple deism does not answer the purpose of despotic governments. They cannot lay hold of religion as an engine, but by mixing it with human inventions and making their own authority a part. Neither does it answer the avarice of priests, but by incorporating themselves and their functions with it and becoming, like the government, a party in the system. It is this that forms the otherwise mysterious connection of church and state, the church humane and the state tyrannic. Were man impressed as fully and as strongly as he ought to be with the belief of a God, his moral life would be regulated by the force of that belief. He would stand in awe of God and of himself and would not do the thing that could not be concealed from either. We will return to this. To give this belief the full opportunity of force, it is necessary that it acts alone. This is deism. But when, according to the Christian Trinitarian scheme, one part of God is represented by a dying man, and another part, called the Holy Ghost, by a flying pigeon, it is impossible that belief can attach itself to such wild conceit. So here again, he's confusing the signified with the signifier. He's seeing a flying pigeon, which is a symbol of it's even in the OTO Lammen, where it has a slightly different meaning. I guess I don't have any Thelemites here because they're not chiming in. But it is obviously a symbol of an unrepresentable thing. The Holy Spirit is a thing that descends on people and can be felt as a palpable energy in particularly high-octane Christian services. But it's not something you can see, so it is represented by symbol, the symbol of the descending dove, descending because it's coming down to man from the heavens, right? And also because the dove is a symbol of peace, right? So, and is pure white and all of this. So it has all these cultural connotations. But here he's just saying, no, there's no holy pigeon. So, you know, we have to point that out too, that he's being ridiculously literal and pedantic, and he is confusing the signifier with the signified. to put it in semiotics terms. What's the dove mean on the lemon? Well, that's not for me to say. That's initiated wisdom. That actually is under oath. You'll have to join the OTO. I'm not a member, so I don't recommend it. But I'm not for or against membership in organized thelema. It has been the scheme of the Christian church and of all the other invented systems of religion to hold man in ignorance of the Creator, as it is of governments to hold man in ignorance of his rights. The systems of the one are as false as those of the other, and are calculated for mutual support. The study of theology, as it stands in Christian churches, is the study of nothing. It is founded on nothing. It rests on no principles. It proceeds by no authorities. It has no data. It can demonstrate nothing, and it admits of no conclusion. Not anything can be studied as a science without our being in possession of the principles upon which it is founded. And as this is not the case with Christian theology, it is therefore the study of nothing. Instead, then, of studying theology, as is now done out of the Bible and Testament, the meanings of which books are always controverted, and the authenticity of which is disproved, it is necessary that we refer to the Bible of the creation. The principles we discover there are eternal and of divine origin. They are the foundation of all the science that exists in the world, and must be the foundation of theology. We can know God only through his works. We cannot have a conception of any one attribute, but by following some principle that leads to it. We have only a confused idea of his power, if we have not the means of comprehending something of its immensity. We can have no idea of his wisdom, but by knowing the order and manner in which it acts. The principle, Paul says, sounds like he was a Ricky Gervais level atheist. Yeah. So the question is, like, is he a Ricky Gervais atheist, or is Ricky Gervais a Tom Paine level atheist? Could a man be placed... the principles of science lead to this knowledge, for the creator of man is the creator of science. I agree with that. And it is through that medium that man can see God, as it were, face to face. I also agree with that. Could a man be placed in a situation and endowed with the power of vision to behold at one view and to contemplate deliberately the structure of the universe, to mark the movements of the several planets, the cause of their varying appearances, the unerring order in which they revolve, even to the remotest comet, their connection and dependence on each other, and to know the system of laws established by the Creator that governs and regulates the whole, he would then conceive, far beyond what any church theology can teach him, the power, the wisdom, the vastness, the munificence of the Creator. He would then see that all the knowledge man has of science, and that all mechanical arts by which he renders his situation comfortable here, are derived from that source. I agree. His mind, exalted by the scene and convinced by the fact, would increase in gratitude as it increased in knowledge. His religion or his worship would become united with his improvement as a man. Any employment he followed that had any connection with the principles of the creation, as everything of agriculture, of science, and of the mechanical arts has, would teach him more of God and of the gratitude he owes to him than any theological Christian sermon he now hears. Great objects inspire great thoughts. Great munificence excites great gratitude, but the groveling tales and doctrines of the Bible and the Testament are fit only to excite contempt. Though man cannot arrive, at least in this life, at the actual scene I have described, he can demonstrate it, because he has a knowledge of the principles upon which the creation is constructed. We know that the greatest works can be represented in model, and that the universe can be represented by the same means. The same principles by which we measure an inch or an acre of ground will measure to millions in extent. A circle of an inch diameter has the same geometrical properties as a circle that would circumscribe the universe. The same properties of a triangle that will demonstrate upon paper the course of a ship will do it on the ocean, and when applied to what are called the heavenly bodies, will ascertain to a minute the time of an eclipse, though these bodies are millions of miles from us. This knowledge is of divine origin, and it is from the Bible of the creation that man has learned it, and not from the stupid Bible of the church that teaches man nothing. All the knowledge man has of science and of machinery, by the aid of which his existence is rendered comfortable upon earth, and without which he would be scarcely distinguishable in appearance and condition from a common animal, comes from the great machine and structure of the universe. The constant and unwearied observations of our ancestors upon the movements and revolutions of the heavenly bodies in what are supposed to have been the early ages of the world have brought this knowledge upon earth. It is not Moses and the prophets, nor Jesus Christ, nor his apostles that have done it. The Almighty is the great mechanic of the creation, the first philosopher and original teacher of all science. Let us, then, learn to reverence our Master. and let us not forget the labors of our ancestors. Had we, at this day, no knowledge of machinery, and were it possible that man could have a view, as I have before described, of the structure and machinery of the universe, he would soon conceive the idea of constructing some, at least, of the mechanical works we now have, and the idea so conceived would progressively advance in practice. Or could a model of the universe, such as called an orrery, be presented before him and put in motion, his mind would arrive at the same idea. This was the wishful thinking of the Enlightenment. Such an object, and all of this thinking broke down systematic in the early part of the 20th century because of the atrocities of the two world wars. Essentially, people lost faith that in science or that material progress would automatically lead somewhere good. Such an object, that all died in Auschwitz, and the mechanization of human killing. Such an object and such a subject would, while it improved him in knowledge useful to himself as a man and a member of society, as well as entertaining, afford far better matter for impressing him with a knowledge of and a belief in the Creator, and of the reverence and gratitude that man owes to him, than the stupid texts of the Bible and of the Testament, from which, be the talents of the preacher what they may, only stupid sermons can be preached. If man must preach, let him preach something that is edifying, and from texts that are known to be true. The Bible of the creation is inexhaustible in texts. Every part of science, whether connected with the geometry of the universe, with the systems of animal and vegetable life, or with the properties of inanimate matter, is a text as well for devotion as for philosophy, for gratitude as for human improvement. It will perhaps be said that if such a revolution in the system of religion takes place, every preacher ought to be a philosopher. Most certainly, and every house of devotion a school of science. It has been by wandering from the immutable laws of science and the light of reason and setting up an invented thing called revealed religion that so many wild and blasphemous conceits have been formed of the Almighty. The Christians have made him the murderer of himself and the founder of a new religion to supersede and expel the Jewish religion, and to find pretense at admission for these things they must have supposed his power or his wisdom imperfect or his will changeable, and the changeableness of the will is imperfection of the judgment. The philosopher knows that the laws of the Creator have never changed with respect either to the principles of science or the properties of matter. Why, then, is it supposed they have changed with respect to man? I here close the subject. I have shown in all the foregoing parts of this work that the Bible and the Testament are impositions and forgeries, and I leave the evidence I have produced in proof of it to be refuted, if anyone can do it, and I leave the ideas that are suggested in the conclusion of the work to rest on the mind of the reader, certain as I am that when opinions are free, either in matters of government or religion, truth will finally and powerfully prevail. The end. Okay. Woo. Thank you for the super chats. We're still 3 away from, we're going to do the cat reveal, but we're still 3 away from Mommy Blogger. So, yeah, Chad says from the void all proceed, which, by the way, Judaism has a complete understanding of. It's the Ein Sof in Kabbalah, at least for those who follow it. So a very, very sophisticated understanding of existence. So, okay, where do we go from here? Here's the question that I pose to you, right? Well, first of all, is Paine right? Is Paine right? Is he wrong? If he's right, how is he right? If he's wrong, how is he wrong? I want to hear your opinions. The second question is, how'd it go, right? So, which really the question is, did the Enlightenment work? Which is particularly relevant now because we actually have movements in society, for instance, the Dark Enlightenment, people like Mencius Moldbug and the alt-right. Hello, I love you too, Dirtworm. And people like Peter Thiel, who are putting a lot of money behind questioning and perhaps overturning Enlightenment values. Now, you haven't missed the cat yet, don't worry. And these people are very active. So, this is not a dry academic question. This is a political question for right now. It involves America, where America's going. It involves the Middle East. It involves the whole world. Before we even get to Islam, let's just talk about the Enlightenment. So my question to you is he right? did history bear out that if religious stories and restrictions are removed from people, that they automatically become better and become good? Because let me break this down for you. The central conceit of the Enlightenment, basically the Enlightenment was produced on several levels by Europe coming in contact with the New World. First of all, it was produced by coffee. I'm dead serious. Caffeine, which led to the creation of all-night cafes, which led to a total quantum leap in European thinking and knowledge. So it was produced by that, but more importantly, it was produced by contact between Europeans and the native tribes in America. And we still linger on some of these assumptions, where you had stories coming back, and also in some cases, you had Indians brought back to Europe and essentially put on display as in zoos. It's really dark. But the ideas that provoked in particularly the French intelligentsia, we got this idea of the noble savage, which was their term at the time, which was this idea that, wow, remember, Europe's coming out of the Black Plague, the Crusades, the Middle Ages, the Inquisition, all of these horrors. Everyone's dirty, At the same time, this was at the time that we also got smallpox from the New World, and the reason why those French people in the 17th century wore all that powder makeup and wigs is because, first of all, their hair had fallen out and their faces were viciously pockmarked from smallpox pustules. So they had all that stuff on. And also the reason that they had those huge dresses is because they never took baths. So they needed to not have people smell them. It's wild. So Europe's coming from that perspective, and then they're seeing basically people who are living more or less in line with nature, with clean water and food and air and all of that in America. And certain people, and liberal thinkers of the time say oh, this must be man's Edenic state. This must be what people are like when all these structures that we recognize that we've been fighting in Europe are taken off them. If they don't have the church, if they don't have the state, if they don't have the Inquisition, then they must be, humans become free. And so the core conceit of liberalism, and I mean true liberalism as emanating from the Enlightenment, is that people are inherently good. People are inherently good. Now, that's also a loaded statement, and you have to understand that it wasn't just contact with the New World that led the Enlightenment thinkers to believe that humans are inherently good. It was also the exact inversion of the doctrine of the Catholic Church, which is original sin. Man is born in sin. Right? So basically, these liberal thinkers are looking at the New World and saying, if that's true, if mankind is born in sin, then how come these people who don't have Christianity seem to be doing real well? Right? They're in the Garden of Eden. Why can't we emulate them? And from that idea, we get hundreds of years of goddamn hippies. Because this is the idea that underlies the whole trajectory of liberalism into its current form. So I would propose also, and if I haven't said this before, I should definitely say it again, that if you truly want to understand what the liberal conservative argument actually is, not in its day-to-day social media form, but at the highest Platonic essential level, what the liberal conservative debate actually is, it is the nature versus nurture debate. Right? But it's also so it's kind of like, and this is what drives the, liberals now, the reason why they want to tear all these structures, particularly the left, the reason why they want to tear everything down, whether they realize it or not, why Everything you hear from the left is structural this, structural that, defund this, defund that, destroy these systems, oppression, imperialism, all of that is because they're working off of that idea, which, by the way, is a fundamentally racist idea and comes from a complete misunderstanding of cultures by Europe, right? And a projection of Christian ideas about Genesis onto people that have nothing to do with it, right? And completely ignores the Aztec Empire. It ignores the Incan Empire. It ignores the Mayan Empire. It ignores all of the tribes in America and how different they all were, right? And the fact that they were often consistently in cartel-style warfare with each other, right? So it's a fantastical European creation in their mind, which is forgotten. So the reason why the left behaves as it does, even though it probably doesn't realize this, is because they're still working on this fundamental idea that humans are inherently good, and therefore, if they're behaving in a bad manner, it must be nurture. It must be these structures put on them. And he's arguing that here. There's a direct line between this and defund the police, because he's saying if you take the church structure off them, they will be inherently good moral deists. Whereas the conservative mind starts with man is bad by nature and must be, because original sin, and must be educated and shaped to be good. Right? And the truth is somewhere in that spectrum, right? But neither extreme has the whole story. Yeah, and far right seeking to do the same thing. So then we get into horseshoe theory, really. You can also argue, however, that a lot of what passes for the far right far right's a meaningless term now because it's so loaded, it's thrown around. But if we're talking about Nazis, of which we have, Chad's misunderstanding what I'm saying. If we're talking about, we should invade Canada, Chad. Come on now. It's for their own good. If we're talking about Nazis, the reason why, as has been pointed out to me recently, the reason why Nazis are called Nazis is because their actual name is National Socialists. You never hear people say that. Get the fuck out, Stockopolyps. Out. This fucking guy. I guess there's no way to permanently block someone. Fucking Nazis. Okay, so Nazis are leftists. They're collectivists. When we have all these Nazi groups in the US, like Atomwaffen or other things like that, who are trying to do violent shit to tear down the system, they also want to get rid of the system, but it's so that they can do their ethno state where they can do white collectivism. It's not about the individual, so it's actually not inherently right-wing. It's actually, Nazism is actually left-wing. I know people are going to argue with that, but be it what it is, it's a different form of, it's just racist socialism. Otherwise, there's really no difference, right? And they both have tremendous body counts. So just because the socialism is racist doesn't mean it's no longer a left-wing idea. And this is what people need to understand about Nazis, right? So, ow, fuck. Anyways, so my question to you here is, Is Doge ripping apart the Constitution, or are they just defunding are they just getting rid of a bunch of wasteful federal government shit? It's left over from the New Deal. I'm not blocking you. I'm just responding. The only one that's getting blocked is Stockopolyps because he actually is a Nazi. Everyone is welcome to vehemently disagree with me. Just don't come in here yelling about blood and soil, or just being unnecessarily rude for no reason. But yeah, no, I don't expect people to agree with me. Please, it's better for the stream if you disagree with me, because then we can have something to talk about. But this is my question to you. And yeah, exactly. Eric's saying you're putting the perpetuation of the race above your individual self, right? That's collectivism. Right? Well, Chad, you can disagree with me, but you don't get to tell me what I defend and what I say or what I don't. That we ain't doing that. Okay, so my question to you is, let's take it out of me and my opinions, because this is about the chat. My question to you is, and hopefully we're not going to get off on a tangent about Doge. I know you're not a troll or a hater. I know you're not. I was talking about the actual Nazi stockopolypse. So, and like I said, you're welcome to disagree with me, but don't tell me what to say or not say, or what to do or not do. Because I have a new rule. My new rule for 2025 is every time someone tells me not to do something, I do it 10 to 100 times harder. Nazi and European collectivism equate to the same thing. When we're talking about what I'm saying is Nazism, white nationalism, it's all the same shit. It's racist socialism. It's socialism for a specific ethnic group, right? No one tells you Nazi was a word come up with by the British press. The actual name of the Nazis was not just National Socialists, it was the National Socialist Democratic Workers' Party. And it was completely concerned with overturning class and putting everything on a race basis, and was very much aimed at working people. All right, it's cool if we disagree. That's fine. I don't expect everyone to agree with me. Okay, so, and I'm always open to revising my opinions. So my question to you is, and let's take it back to the question. Was he right that if you take off, let's do a specific question. Let's do a specific question. We now have close to 230 years, something like that, after this book was written. We now have a lot of data. Do you think that human beings have been better on par with religious structures taken off of them? And I saw somebody said people have never had religion taken off of them. That's not true at all. America is a godless society outside of the religious parts that are very obsessed with religion. But by and large, America is a consumerist, materialist society, and Europe is even more so. So I don't think that's true. We are certainly not religious in the sense of the religion has very little. We can talk about dark money and all that, but religion has very little to no say in what the federal government does. Obviously, we can argue that point. But my question to you is, was Paine right that if you take religion, if you take religious structures off of people, that they will be inherently good? And I'm giving you the context on that and why that was an important idea in the Enlightenment and it was a response to the church. What do you think? What do you think? Oh, we got almost less than 3 minutes left for the mommy vlogger. Got to get those in. So Chad says, I think religion's good for social cohesion, but postmodernism is disintegration. Enjoy the Show says, if the majority of people are identifying as religious, we live in a religious society. Religion and consumerism are not mutually exclusive. True. I'm not sure the majority of people do identify as religious. They definitely don't in Europe. I'm not sure what the numbers are in the US, but England is essentially an atheist society. Slim Jim says, I was under the impression that America was a Christian nation for most of its time up until World War II. Forgive my ignorance. Well, but the thing is, they don't tell you this, right? I actually assumed that it was, but no, they don't tell you that. And as I said in the last week's stream, it's even been it was put into legal writing at the Treaty of Tripoli that America, by the federal government, that America is not a Christian nation. They don't tell you that either. So next time Christian nationalists are trying to tell you that we need a Christian nation, remember the words Treaty of Tripoli. Just remember Treaty of Tripoli. That's your answer to Christian nationalism. Busiva says it's 501c religion, TM. Yeah. So yeah, again, Enjoy the Show says we have never had a non-religious society. Well, I think I've already answered that question more or less. Lou says definitely not. Religion was founded as a moral structure, but then got distorted by power, as they all do. Shebrew says it depends on what's replacing religion. Okay. Dirtworm says you're just removing a pillar of a culture, not replacing it. So not sure if it's completely good or bad. Maybe both. Okay. Kai says, I don't know if society's better off, but I'm freeing myself from religion was part of healing trauma. So I must admit I'm biased. Okay. It's true for a lot of people. Septimus says the intelligent few will be unaffected by the absence of religion. Probably true, but you're talking about the very few people, but not the masses, in my opinion. Yeah, Kai agrees. Enjoy the Show says I'm not sure how well we can speak for Europe since we don't live there. Well, you can just look up Pew's. Go look up Pew Forum research. This is not a controversial thing. Chad says, look, separation of church and state is the name of the game. Theocracy is the enemy. I agree. Eric says, good for social cohesion for those participating in the religion. Bad for social cohesion by dividing up individuals into different religions and introducing in-group, out-group dynamics. Okay. Marissa says, I don't think so necessarily that if you take religion away from people that they will be inherently good. I think spiritualism and some religion intertwined into society helps people. Okay. I agree as well, and that is articulate. Witchmaster says the Treaty of Tripoli signed in 1796 was a peace and friendship agreement between the United States and the Bey and subjects of Tripoli. That's correct, but in there, at one point, it is specifically written in legality, in legal terms, America is not a Christian nation. Why it had to be in that treaty, I don't know, but it is. So Enjoy the Show says the Abrahamic religions have been a net negative for society. I think a nature-based religion would benefit society. Well, so essentially you're arguing the position of more or less the neo-pagan movement since the 1960s, which also a lot of modern liberalism is based on, but they won't tell you that. Particularly Hillary Clinton brought in a lot of neo-pagan ideas into the White House. So that's a conversation for another day. Also, the focus on the ecological movement, all of this comes from neo-paganism, but they're not going to tell you that. And they're all up about being witches now. So there you have it. To be a witch is de rigueur now on the left. Whatever that actually means to people. So that's an argument, but, look, maybe. But then again, you look at neo-paganism. Neo-paganism has pedophiles in it too. You've got Isaac Bonewitz, allegedly, Marion Zimmer Bradley, definitely, Peter Christopherson, right? So that's certainly not just a Catholic problem, just to pick that one issue. And Eric says, yeah, careful, nature-based can quickly turn into blood and soil. Okay. Yes. And then I'll restate the question because I'm going to get distracted. But again, recommendation for the movie Midsommar, because right now, in particular, Nazis have been taking over neo-pagan spaces because, the nature worship and separation, you can see how the nature worship and saying all Abrahamic religions are bad can quickly become blood and soil and the Jews are bad. It's not that big of a leap. And people who are in those groups are already ideologically disaffected from society, so they unfortunately tend to be easy targets. So, is it? Okay, but I take your opinion. Okay. But the other thing I was going to say is but I will draw a hard line on the idea that nature-based religions were somehow inherently better is also not borne out by history. It is also another noble savage idea. Someone says, example, Aztecs. There are many things which act like religion, but are not necessarily religion. Right. You see in modern society, people have replaced religion with consumer cultism, I'm an Apple person, that type of thing. So the question was, to restate the question, do you agree given the last 200 years, do you agree with not just Paine, but the Enlightenment's assertion that if religion is complete, if we completely get rid of religion, that society will be better and people will be inherently good without that imposed upon them? That's the question. Chad says Christianity is a program. MAGA and Christian nationalism is a program. We need a cohesive and unitive program. Well, who is we in this case? Who is we? Sean says approximately 47% of Americans identify as religious. Okay, cool. So while 33% consider themselves spiritual but not religious, around 62 to 68% of Americans identify as Christian. Okay, so America's still very religious. Europe, not so much. I'm a little biased because I spent most of my time living in very blue cities. So now not so much, although Austin's pretty blue. Josh says, I'm guilty of romanticizing foreign religions, but I find them inconceivable to join if I see them in person. Yeah, absolutely. This is another mistake the hippies made. Because like even Tibetan Buddhism has all kinds of effed up stuff in it, right? And they're awful with women. Historically and now. In general, not always. Elizabeth says, to the specific point of our people born good, I think a lot of the science studying the... okay, this is great. You need to pay attention to this. To the specific point of our people born good, I think a lot of the science studying the brains of serial killers would align with this. Most of these behaviors are genetic or trauma-based. Interesting. So you don't... Isn't it true that can't you be genetically born a psychopath, though? That would be interesting to know because, okay, so, and this is where I tend to fall on arguments, not to bias the argument, but this may be a question which it can just simply be circumvented by better science, right? Where it's like nature, nurture. Well, look, they didn't even know about DNA back then, right? Let alone have sequenced the human genome, let alone have an understanding of the brain. We just got to understanding, we just began to understand neurodivergence in the brain in the last 10 years, and science didn't even believe that there was such a thing as the female orgasm until the late 60s. So, yeah. So I think this is something that scientific breakthroughs may simply invalidate. Chaz says it will always be the war of rival programmers. Yes, indeed. Neo-paganism is a bit cringe, but I like it. Yeah, I mean, when it's innocuous, it's fine, Ty says, I say we need to rethink the word religion. Make it an archaic term like either or something. Religion to me is about 85% community, 10% spirituality, 5% individuality, but within social confines. So that's also a great point. So that 85% community, here's the deal. Most people who are into magic or the occult are loners, okay? Or they're certainly self-motivated, let's put it that way. So for us, it's that 10% spirituality, 5% individuality is 100%. Or let's say it's 80%, right? It's flipped. It's 85%. For us, it's 85% spirituality and individuality, and the other 15% is community. For the normies, at 85% community can literally be the difference between life and death. It's not just that though. It's how they stay, it's how they stay in touch with other people in a good context. It's how social cohesion is maintained. But it can also be the difference between somebody relapsing onto booze or not, or whatever, right? It's like, and we now know the science on community. Being a loner is really, really bad for you, all the way down to the cellular level, in as much as it can lead to illness, whereas being in community is really, really good for you, right? Which is, even if it's online, I think. So it's something. All right, Witchmaster, goodbye. These two people, by the way, Witchmaster, don't come back, okay? Is Israel a modern day example of blood and soil? Goodbye. Thank you. Marissa says, no, I do not agree. To Witchmaster's comment, or what? Ty says it's always going to be there, just how and why and to what extent we interact with it. Kai says, I agree regarding the Nazi problem in nature faith spaces. I've had to go into solitary practice because I was around way too many people flirting with white identitarianism. It was admittedly scary. if you're willing to share a little bit more on that in terms of where and what, you don't have to identify anyone, but what types of scenes are we talking about? That, I'm aware of that, but I never leave the house. So like, but I'm aware it's a problem. I don't know firsthand how big of a problem it is, but it sounds like it's a pretty big problem. There's also the Duganists, who are their own problem. Slim Jim says, no, but it should also not be simply imposed on anyone. It's not a black and white issue. Spirituality and or organized religion should be accessible to all and not be forcibly imposed on others. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just a very adult way to look at it. Ty says, I'm from Texas, hence the hat comment. Very red, very Christian, but also really individualistic. I think it could inform us about where we might want religion to go. Interesting. So what would inform religion? Slim Jim says that not forcibly imposing it on others is the tricky part. Obviously, if it is within the practice to spread it, however it says is permissible. Hold on. All right, so let's talk about Islam in that context real quick. So although the majority of America is still religious, or will be religious, and it's not the Middle Ages, right? Because of the Protestant Reformation, Americans have the ability to choose their profession of faith. And therefore, because the church no longer has at least overt control of the government, then we're not seeing the same thing. In as much as, you're not going to be burned at the stake by the Catholic Church. So we tend to see religion as a lot more innocuous now than it was. It doesn't have, now that's not the case with Islam. Islam is not only a religion, but a system of legalism and civic code. And it blatantly converts by the sword. And there's no way that's ever going to be limited or changed. So the reason people underestimate Islam is they assume that it will just be another choice in the consumer shopping market of ideology. What they miss is it's not just a religion, it's a totalizing system that does not feel the same way and will simply mow over and conquer everything around it, as it has for its entire history. Meatwolf says, no, I think in the vacuum removing religion would leave behind, there will still be competing forces to take its place and cause new forms of power struggles and competing ideas that follow. Okay, great. So 20th century, right? Some examples of that. Fascism, communism, right? The cult of authoritarian leaders, Stalin, Hitler, right? Those are Mao. Those are religions. They claim to be not religious and ban all other religions, but it's because they want all the focus on the leader. Right, so that is obviously not an upgrade. So Chad says, Jason, what do you really think of what has happened in Palestine? 90% of casualties are civilian. What do you think? All right, fuck it. If you really want to do this, you'll get your wish. It's this simple. In 2005, Israel pulled out of Gaza and the West Bank voluntarily, removing many of their own civilians with military force against their will. This was done as this was one of the many times that Israel has made massive concessions to the Palestinians, despite their consistent terrorism of the country. And not just them, but also Jordan and so on. Palestinians have been offered their own state 5 times, and they've rejected it every single time because they would much rather destroy Israel. So Israel withdrew from Gaza and the West Bank and allowed them to have elections. Okay, they elected Hamas. Prior to that, the Palestinian resistance, so-called, had been the PLO under Yasser Arafat, who was more or less a Marxist and was not a jihadi, was a complete fucking asshole, but was not a jihadi. That was replaced And that wasn't good either. And during the 1970s, the PLO was thrown out of every other country in that area, including Jordan, including Egypt, including Syria, because they were committing terrorism everywhere they went. Okay, Israel gives them Gaza and the West Bank. They have elections. They elect Hamas, which is a jihadi group. Great. What have they just done? Gaza is now a launching pad for any of the 57 countries surrounding Israel in the Middle East, North Africa to launch weapons from. Okay? It is now a terrorist state. Hamas is the terrorist organization, is now the elected government of Gaza. And the PA, Palestinian Authority, which you hear about in the Western press as somehow moderate, are not moderate. They are also pro-destruction of Israel. They're just not so amped up. So they have 20 years in which they could have, as the Israeli government says, turned Gaza into the Singapore of the Middle East, and in which they were given so many donations by world organizations that they became very wealthy, right? That money, of course, was taken by the billionaire heads of Hamas who hang out in Qatar, and some of whom are dead now, thankfully. They had 20 years in which they could have built the Singapore of the Middle East, and instead they put all of that money into building terror tunnels and launching rockets at Israel every fucking day for 20 years. I mean, every fucking day at times. Right? And this was after the Second Intifada already, when they invented suicide bombing. So by the way, when you see these American college student idiots running around saying globalize the Intifada, Intifada means suicide bombing. Yeah, good luck. Good luck with that world. Okay. During that same time, actually prior to that, this was just shown by the ADL after 9/11, which people seem to have forgotten about. After 9/11, a tremendous amount of money was paid by Iran, the Saudis, and Qatar, depending on how you pronounce it, to begin subverting American societies, from the media to Wikipedia to definitely universities, where Qatar has sent tremendous amounts of money to places like Columbia and Harvard. And it comes with hooks attached, which are a delegitimization of Israel agenda. Okay. This is non-controversial, and the Israelis have been going to extreme lengths to try and show the paper trails on some of this. So, October 7th rolls around. You get these insane fucks breaking through the fence on motorcycles, hopped up on Captagon, which is this weird meth shit they have in the Middle East, which turns people into ruthless, murdering, conscienceless terrorists and often gives them permanent brain damage to boot. They go through the border, massacring, raping, murdering men, women, and children. And we're not talking about soldiers. We're talking about some of the most liberal members of Israeli society who were there in the kibbutzes, which were primarily socialist, most of them, doing community gardens with Palestinians, employing Palestinians, attempting peace work. Many of the people who lived there were some of the most committed to the peace process. The old boomer liberals, it's like, and those people were butchered. And I would love to just really shock you with some of the details, but YouTube's going to be pissed. You need to research it. You need to go look for it yourself. Find and watch the October 7th footage, as much of it as you can. Watch what happened at the Nova Music Festival when these people were butchered by animals who are not human beings. I'm sorry. And I don't mean that because of where they come from. I mean that because they have fallen to the demonic level. They are doing things that demons do, not that humans do. They are no longer human. It wasn't only Hamas combatants. Once they broke through the fence, Palestinian civilians came through. They were the ones who took the Bibas family. They were the ones who were doing quite a lot of the butchering and raping. They then took the hostages back, And I've seen delightful things like them spitting on video into the caved in back head of an Israeli teenager in the back of a pickup truck. And we won't even discuss what happened to women and children on that day. There are and they despite all these people saying, oh, Israel made it up. All these people live stream these atrocities on their GoPros and their phones. We have the record of one of them calling his parents back in Gaza, Mom, Dad, you'll never believe it. I killed 10 Jews. To applause. Gaza is a society that raises its children to be martyrs. Go look at the Memory TV video on this channel, and you'll see lots of footage of them raising, basically training kindergartners to be terrorists in the same way that parents here go to their kids' recitals. They're clapping while these kids are crawling with fake AKs through razor wires and executing people playing Jews. Martyrdom is seen as the highest value. People have no problem whatsoever with sacrificing their children to the cause of martyrdom. So they drag the Israelis back, the captives. The civilians parade. And then what does Israel do? Israel responds exactly like anybody would. Exactly. They have two objectives. Get the hostages back, and there's been, of course, controversy in Israeli society over how these are prioritized. But they have two objectives. Get the hostages back and make sure it doesn't happen again. The Palestinians, specifically the Gazans, Hamas, are not just an isolated group. They're funded by Iran. They're a launching pad for massive powers all over the region who don't give a fuck about them, have expelled them from all of their countries. And by the way, one thing you never hear on the media, Gaza shares a border with Egypt. So how come the Egyptians aren't just solving it and letting them in? Because they don't want to, right? But no, it's only Israel's fault somehow. Okay, so Israel responds completely normally in one of the, perhaps the densest, most populated place on earth, in an urban warfare situation in which it is literally impossible to shoot anywhere without hitting civilians. And despite that, to all current reports, they have achieved a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 terrorist to civilian kill ratio when the best the US ever did was 1-to-9 in Fallujah. Okay. They leaflet, they call ahead. Okay, now some of this you can read as cynical, right? They do their best. From what I understand, they have ethics lawyers embedded with IDF units and so on and so forth. Okay. Here's the problem, one of many problems. People do not understand the logic of terrorism. They don't. They're seeing it as a war between an aggressor and an oppressor and an oppressed. No. First of all, zoom out. Israel is surrounded. Israel is the tiny underdog in the region, not Palestine. Palestine is an extension of the 57 states around Israel, who all use it cynically for their plans. Okay. The logic of there is no universe in all the multiverses. There is no universe in which Hamas did not know what the Israeli response would be. I mean, there's not a whole lot of constants in life, but 3 of them are definitely death, taxes, and if you fuck with the Israelis, they will come for you really, 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 really hard. Duh. There's no universe in which they didn't know that. And so what did they do? They positioned all their weapons. They use human shields. They position their weapons under hospitals. They use Red Cross vans to transport terrorists, they've been doing that for quite a while. That's not new, by the way. They behave in such a manner so that to maximize civilian casualty, so that Israel has to kill civilians. Why? Because it delegitimizes Israel in the eyes of the public. Because then they can take all of that and say, Israel's committing a you-know-what. An unbelievably cruel accusation towards a people who actually did go through that. We're seeing urban warfare. And by the way, we're seeing urban warfare that will typify conflict in the 21st century. It is not an anomaly. This is what war will be like now, because the world is becoming increasingly urbanized. It is packing into megacities like Dhaka, Bangladesh, or Cairo. This is what war will be now. It's what war was in Fallujah in Iraq, right? Okay. So what is Hamas doing? By the way, again, their heads are now all in Qatar counting their billions, right? They're maximizing civilian casualties so that they can take all of that, put it on blast to the entire planet, put it out to student groups in the US who will take it on because they use our weak spot of tolerance of protest, which we should do, but they use our weak spots of free speech and things like that to influence us. I say it doesn't apply to them because they're foreign, right? They're not American citizens, but they recognize our naive compassion and naive view of the world and will use it against us. So they get all this out. Then Iran's client states, Ireland and South Africa. And I remind you, South Africa was overthrown in a Marxist revolution, and Ireland is a terrorist state that bought all of its weapons from Gaddafi during the 70s. And they're not exactly a terrorist state, but you get the idea. Now they get their goons to take Israel to the UN, and I watched those hearings at length. I watched all of them, right? To make this, and they had it all ready to go. Like it was a week later. Like it was that's what, maybe it wasn't a week, but it felt maybe a month or a couple months. Like they were ready to go to bring this massive case to the UN when we know that there is also a tremendous amount of authoritarian influence at the UN, including from Iran. Here's the problem. If you have a United Nations where it's one country, one vote, or however they do it, okay, most of the countries on earth are autocracies or dictatorships. So you're giving them a democratic vote with democratic countries? There's a reason why the US has veto power over the UN, thank God, right? Okay. So they make this huge case that Israel is doing which is ridiculous. It's urban warfare, okay? It's nasty, it's horrible, it's tragic, it's awful, it's violent, it's bloody, it's cruel, but it is what it is. And I don't see any other way that Israel could have responded. So what happens now? They drag them to the UN. They put their content of all this maximized civilian casualties all over the internet, a lot of which isn't even from the, they've recycled footage from the Syrian war. A lot of these dead baby photos are also from other conflicts and so on. Not all of them. Why? Okay, well, part of it is because most of the world is anti-Semitic and treats Israel on a macrocosmic level the way that Jews, unfortunately, have at times been treated in many societies around the world. And they can't wait to destroy Israel because a lot of, particularly Muslim countries, have this idea that if they just get rid of the Jews, everything will be fine. Because yes, they are that uneducated. And they'll never look at the fact that their own system produces no good results. It's not the Jews sabotaging them. Okay, so American liberals buy it hook, line, and sinker. The UN, which again is largely not controlled, but massively influenced by autocracies like Iran, North Korea, and so forth, right? And by the way, which operates UNRWA in Gaza and I believe the West Bank, which is the Palestinians are the only group on the planet that has their own UN agency, which has been shown by the Israelis to be infested with Hamas, to work with Hamas, and even to provide material aid to Hamas. And they're the ones, by the way, that are giving the stats on the deaths. Okay, if I get any of this wrong, please, you can let me know in the comments. Why? It's real simple. If you break Israel, you break America. And there's a couple reasons why that's important. One is I don't have any way to substantiate this, but I suspect that when Putin started realizing that he was losing the Ukraine war, he leaned on Iran to lean on Hamas to attack Israel, because anyone can tell you that America's going to go to bat for Israel. And he thought that if we end up fighting a war on two fronts, we'll most likely withdraw resources from the Ukraine to assist Israel. And that's exactly what's happened. The other is simple. If you break the connection between the US and Israel, you break the entire current world order. You break America. It's over. It's over. And I mean that literally, and I mean that esoterically as well. When the British Empire let go of protection of Israel, its empire fell. We will not. As far as I'm concerned, we made a promise. We took on a karmic duty when we liberated Europe. And when we helped establish the modern state of Israel, we took on the mandate of playing that role, and we must continue to. Now, the final point, the thing about women and children. Okay, great. So, when you have a society that raises children to be terrorists and in which mothers are happy to sacrifice their children, there is no such thing as a women and children are not combatants thing, because they are. The average age of a Hamas fighter is 17. The average age of a Hamas fighter is 17. That counts as a child. So depending on who's doing the statistics, and nobody listens to Israel, unfortunately, depending on who's doing this, you can see how easily the situation can be manipulated for the international audience. Now, again, with the Palestinian civilians. One of the most famous people that was kidnapped, quite sadly, was Kafir Bibis, the baby that was on all of those posters. Also, his mother was kidnapped. Also, his brother was kidnapped. They all died. Or I don't know the current status of the mother, but I know that 2 children were killed a month after they were taken. Kafir Bibis, the infant, was strangled to death with somebody's bare hands. They did the autopsy, was strangled to death with bare hands. And then the Hamas people beat that body into a pulp with rocks to claim that it was an Israeli airstrike that did it. And they returned that body cruelly. They returned those 2 bodies to the Israelis after having a massive parade of the supposed innocent Palestinian civilians. They had this massive parade where they had this poster of Netanyahu as a vampire and saying they're going to destroy Israel, which, by the way, is in the stated charter of all these countries around Israel, like the Houthis in Yemen. They bring the 2 children back with Hamas propaganda, I believe, thrown into the boxes, rather cruel. And then they give the wrong body and say it's the mother. That's what they're dealing with. And they're parading, they're happy about it. Okay, great. Now they're bombing again. Well, they've had peace talks for months in which Hamas has refused all of their offers or made offers which are onerous and absurd. Knowing full well that the whole world, that every fucking student radical out there is backing them up, and that the average opinion has massively turned against Israel. The war on the ground is only part of it. The real war is for mass public opinion online. And we're in a new form of warfare where the social media images you can produce and the narrative that you produce around the war, not for the population of one country, but for the whole planet, is the battlefield. So I have chosen my side on the right side. And I am in a battle. And we all are, whether you realize it or not. So, my question to you is, what should Israel have done? There's just a lightning bolt outside. What should Israel have done? And my final caveat is this. When looking at any ethical issue, I tend to fall back on deontology or Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, which is an excellent tool that I reference a lot because people should definitely use it, which simply goes like this. When you're contemplating an ethical dilemma, ask yourself, based on the outcomes which are offered, or the choice that is offered, if you go, depending on if you choose one thing, what would the world look like if everyone chose that? And vice versa. So example, in this case, let's apply that, and it'll make sense as I apply that. Let's apply that to this situation. Do I want to live in a world in which everyone, meaning any country, can respond with lethal force when it is attacked by terrorists? Well, it's not exactly comfortable. It's not happy. It sucks. But what's the other option? Okay. Do I want to live in a world in which terrorists who intentionally target civilians, women and children and elderly, and butcher, grape, and torture them on live video, and would have continued to go if they hadn't been stopped by the IDF, thank God, would have continued to as long as they could have? Do I want to live in a world in which that type of action is rewarded by the international community, in which the response is to say, oh, you're the victim, murdering terrorists, you're the victim, and in fact, we're going to give you exactly what you want, a two-state solution. We're going to give you your own state, which is what the Biden fucking administration was trying to do. Think about the precedent that sets. Now, any terrorist on any front in the world, whether it's Pakistan, India, whether it's Northern Ireland, whether it's Basque separatists, whether it's the Quebecois, or anyone, now any terrorist can now attack a civilian population and then go cry to the UN and get exactly what they want. Do I want to live in that world? Fuck no. Absolutely not. Under any circumstance whatsoever do I or any of you want that to be the world that we live in. Period. And I don't care how many idiots screech about globalizing the intifada. We'll see if you still say that when your college cafeteria gets suicide bombed. That's my take on it. Israel high. And may God continue to bless the IDF. All right. More question. Wow, there's a ton of comments. Okay. Dirtworm, I feel like religion is like anything. It's the people doing good, bad with the religion, not the religion doing good, bad to people. Well, yes and no, because because people will be bad all on their own, but when you have a religion like Islam, which directly commands people to convert by the sword, allows you to take 9-year-old girls as brides, like Muhammad did. Oh, excuse me. He took Aisha as a bride at 6. He was nice enough to wait till 9 until he consummated it. And that's really just the tip of the horror iceberg. When the religion mandates people's worst impulses, you got a whole different situation, right? It's kind of like saying, yeah, there's lots of Nazis, but there's a big effing difference between there being random Nazis that show up on YouTube chats and them having their own country. That's a big difference. All right. So Elizabeth says psychopathy is chiefly genetic or inherited. Okay. Well, to a certain extent, at least in that case. Okay, I'll say this. Yes, it seems to solve the nature versus nurture thing, but the other part is some genes, you can have a genetic predisposition towards something, but it may not be expressed unless certain conditions are met. So even that doesn't fully resolve it, because some people may have a psychopathy gene, but it's not expressed. You know, by the way, the best way to start expressing negative genetic traits is alcohol. Enjoy This Show says there are studies that show the brains of conservatives and liberals have predictable differences. A lot of our differences are biological. Well, okay, how does that explain people tending to become more conservative as they get older? Like, how does that explain that people quite often change in their life? I'm curious. Slim Jim says we can all fall under the normie category. Sure. Eric says, if people are not inherently good and need to be nurtured into goodness, why does it follow that religion is required for that nurturing? Okay, well, what would an alternative system be, right? It's a perfectly valid question, right? But do we actually, and it's related to the question that people have raised, which is, well, what do we replace it with? Dirtworm, loner here, can confirm. Elizabeth says, if you haven't seen Crazy Not Insane, it has interesting science around what drives humans to harm. That's interesting. All right. Oregano, Batman, feedback, better gear, happy viewers. Yes, so cheers to Batman. It wasn't oregano. Imagination says, religion is a good thing for people who need a moral structure framework. It's not necessary for those who understand that to live a good life, you need to be a good person. Well, even for people like that, you need reminders. Marissa says, right, a totalizing system, I assume referring to Islam. Dat dude says, howdy, Mr. Louv. Howdy, right back. Chase says, how about ghosts? A curiosity that peeps its way through in the various spiritual traditions and folklores. A real phenomenon or a reflection of our need for ourselves to continue on after death. An open question, but it is interesting that it's completely cross-cultural. Chaos Moon says it's both with the psychopath issue because the data is transferred through the DNA as well as through the behaviors of the psychopathic family members. It's easier to survive it as a psychopath oneself. That's interesting. Chaos Moon says, epigenetics as well. DNA gets switched on. Yeah. Josh says based. I assume that was about my Israel take. Slim Jim says it blows my mind they haven't figured it out yet they're still going out wearing keffiyehs and chanting. Yeah. Enjoy the show says, I've never heard of that drug you just mentioned. Sounds like it turns them into reavers. Yeah. Slim Jim says it's more like meth, but more practical. Yeah. Luckily, it's not over here, but I believe it's primarily produced in Syria. Syria is a massive Captagon producer. It makes it, I don't know about now. Well, I'm sure now that they've been overrun by ISIS, which you never hear about. Also, you don't hear about people being massacred in Africa by Boko Haram, but you hear about it when Israel's involved. But yeah, no, like, thank God it's not over here. It's a Middle East thing. Marissa says, I agree it's demonic. Chad says, I appreciate your perspective. This is important. You're quite welcome. Alex says, I'm back. Yeah, I tend to just assume that everyone has the same information I'm playing with, which is a bad assumption. So hopefully that at least is giving you food for thought. If you don't agree with me, that's fine. I don't expect everyone to agree with me, but that's the thinking that I put into it. Alex says, I'm back. Hey, everyone, what I miss? I'm a cowboy. Yep. Josh B. And this is a point. The demographics look unfavorable when we have so many fewer children than Muslims. Well, and this is a real thing. I mean, it's not. And this is, by the way, this is a global issue. They talk about this in India as well. So, yeah. Shebrew says the mother's dead. They were all buried together. That's very tragic. And I suspect that the father of that family will, we were just talking about here last night, will probably live with suicidal ideation every day for the rest of his life. It's tragic. And I know there's controversy over he hasn't even got much support from the government. Eric says you don't need to go so far as to say there are no Palestinian civilians to make your point. That's not what I said. I didn't say there's no Palestinian civilians. What I did say is many of these so-called civilians were partying for Hamas's actions, reveling in Hamas's actions, or participating in Hamas's actions. Those are not civilians. That doesn't mean there's no Palestinian civilians, but I will say that have a lot of Palestinian civilians been killed? Yes, obviously. Many have also been killed by failing rockets shot from Hamas, but yes, as Douglas Murray says, every single one of those casualties is the fault of Hamas, because they are being cynically used as pawns by people who do not give a fuck about them. They don't care. They don't care. They're over in Qatar. It's all just martyrdom for them. For them, it's just chess pawns to pull. The same arguments used by Hamas about Israel, since military participation is compulsory. Okay, that is, and also I will say the same argument was used by bin Laden to justify 9/11, because he said that Americans elect officials that support Israel, therefore we're enemy combatants under Islamic law. So I agree with the second part of that, But I'm also saying, well, I'm not saying the first part of it. I didn't say there were no Palestinian civilians. What I'm saying is the line is very blurry. And you can see how that can be exploited to great effect by an incredibly cynical terrorist organization. By the way, as of the ceasefire, Hamas had completely replenished their number of fighters from pre-October 7th levels. So presumably they're coming from the rest of the Middle East to fight, which goes to show my point that this is not just about Gaza. It's about the entire Islamic world, both there and here. Yeah, Shebrew says, Eric, he's not saying that. Yeah. Ty says, so basically it's the question that Tom Sowell says no liberal ever asks about economics, but at what cost? Oh, that's a great quote. Yeah. Eric says it sounded like he was saying that when he questioned where there were women and children, they could count as civilians since the average Hamas member is young. No, I do question that because many of those people who are being counted, what I'm talking about is when they're counting casualty numbers. Those people are saying, oh, it's 90% women civilians, women and children. Quite a lot of those are quite likely combatants. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying there are no civilians in Gaza. That I'm not saying. What I am saying is the civilians that are there, well, it's not exactly like they can stop what's going on, unfortunately, because they'll be killed by Hamas, but they are being used as pawns. Shebrew says, Chase, why should a society have to I guess Chase retracted his messages, but she says, why should a society have to constantly be amping up its security? Why not just participate in psychopathic behaviors? I don't understand. Chad says, you've given a lot to chew on. You don't disappoint. I thank you sincerely. You're quite welcome. And again, you may come to a different perspective. That's totally fine. But that's the thinking that I've done. So maybe there's information I'm missing, but that's the general shape of it. Slim Jim says, do you think people around the globe or even just in America are that anti-Semitic? Yes, I do. I do. I do. And I think that people have had a rude awakening about that since October 7th. I just retweeted on Twitter, okay? So to drive this point home. This is on my X account, at Jason Louv. So a guy named John Pavlovitz, who is, I think, an author of If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. Yeah, super liberal, super duper liberal. But like a lot of liberal Jews in America who have traditionally supported the Democratic Party, they're realizing things aren't necessarily as they assumed. And his tweet is, oh hell, I'll just put it up for you instead of reading it because we're on stream. I'll just leave this up for a bit. Come on. No, it's not letting me. Okay, oops. What the hell? Well, give me a sec, hold on. Okay, so can I do... It's not letting me add it. Wait, okay. Real boomer hours, who's up? Fuck. I would have to quit out and the program's messing up. Okay. Let's see. No, it's not doing it. Okay, I'm just going to have to read the tweet. John Pavlovitz. I've started to realize that Anne Frank and her family wouldn't have been safe around a lot of people I know and loved and once respected. That's not something you get over. This is an ultra liberal Jew. Ultra Democrat Party supporting. John Pavlovitz, I've started to realize that Anne Frank and her family wouldn't have been safe around a lot of people I know and loved and once respected. That's not something you get over. So for me, personally, as somebody who has met survivors of the Holocaust, who were on the trains, and that aside, is just a thinking human being, for me, it's rather important to not be one of those people, just personally. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to look myself in the eyes when this is all over, as it will be. So, let's see. And the entire Muslim world is incredibly anti-Semitic. There's a great guy on YouTube, Bosch Foston, who is he's a cartoonist that does these lovely drawings of Muhammad. And he said that even the most moderate Muslims in America, he was raised as a Muslim in America in, I think, New Jersey, somewhere around there. He said even the most moderate Muslims here love Hitler. He's like their number one favorite non-Muslim ever because he killed the most Jews. And Ayan Hirsi Ali talks about this in her book as well, in Somalia, growing up in Somalia, where it's like if anything bad that happens, people blame the Jews. It was the same in Nazi Germany, or just Germany prior to the Nazis even. There's lots of written stories about that. So, yeah, I do think that there's that much anti-Semitism in the world. And that's a terrifying thing because, to repeat the obvious, what starts with the Jews does not end with the Jews. And it's quite likely that a lot of us will be before the Jews because we're evil pagans. Islamic law, Muslims, as much as they hate Jews, they hate us more. They do. They hate us much more. We're considered pagans, just like the Hindus and the Buddhists, because at least the Jews are, as they say, people of the book and can be put under dimitude, meaning tax slavery. At least they believe in God, just not in the right way. But for everyone else, forget it. It is not us and the second part of the question, are they just holding Israel as a country, Jewish or not, to the same standard as any other country? It's not the same standard. There's clearly a double standard, particularly at the UN when it comes to Israel, right? There have been more sanctions and whatever those, whatever those things are called. Israel has been more sanctioned by the UN than any other country. And by the way, this whole Zionism is a form of racism thing, which is ridiculous. All that Zionism is the right of Jewish people to self-determination and self-defense in their own homeland, just like everybody on earth wants. But it was at the UN in the early 70s that the whole narrative of Zionism is racism was started, because coming off the back of anti-colonial discourse, post-colonial discourse in the late 60s and 70s, which had been key in the African liberation movements, they realized that this was a better tactic to hit the race card and say Zionism is racism, which inverts, just like in the same way of accusing Israel of the G word, inverts the Holocaust narrative and inverts the truth also. The other thing that the UN, that was happening at the UN, is part of this attack is not just a physical attack, it's an attempt to get the entire world to not care about the Holocaust anymore. And when most of the Holocaust has been forgotten by Gen Z people. They probably don't even know it ever happened. But what they've been able to engineer in the minds of the population is, Israel are the Nazis. People have even said that on my Instagram, which is absurd, right? Now, if they can break the story of the Holocaust, the truth of the Holocaust, if they can break, before anyone fucking misunderstands me, if they can break people's understanding of what happened in Germany in the 30s and 40s, and Poland and Eastern Europe, and if they can break the tie between Israel and America, as the Biden administration was well on its way to, all the way up to Kamala Harris refusing to even show up to Netanyahu's speech when he came here, unbelievably disrespectful. If they can do that, it all collapses. It all collapses. And then they can take all that land and have it back. And there will be nothing standing in the way of a global caliphate. Who's going to stay? If America and Israel fall, who's going to stand in the way of global caliphate? India? I hope so. All right. I think you just answered my question. Sounds like the religion mandates it. Yeah. Seb says, okay. I always pick on Canadians. I apologize. Seb says, us Quebecois haven't bombed anything in years, thankfully. As genius as some of us may be, too many dino morons is everywhere. Eric says, sure, it's blurry. My comments weren't meant to argue with your overall take, just a few of the rhetorical weapons you used. Yeah, so I'm clarifying the point. Inequality is an issue. Elizabeth, this is making me think about how the Gen Z left started making 9/11 jokes over the past few years. Are those different? Because we used to do the jet fuels don't melt steel beams joke, or the Bush did 9/11 jokes, which were just retarded. But I don't know. I mean, like Gen Z people were sharing Osama bin Laden's manifesto about why he attacked America in 2002 and being like, whoa, this blows my mind, man. Because China was manipulating the algorithm so that everyone was seeing this terrorist content. Young people are real dumb these days. Eric says dehumanizing rhetoric is dangerous. No, it's a fact of war. And wouldn't it be better strategically to recognize the very human follies of the enemy? Ultimately, you want to bring them back into civilization, not exterminate. Yeah, that's why they pulled out in 2005 when they could have made it into the Singapore of the Middle East. Believe me, every single plan for peace, every single thought that you've had in terms of solutions has been tried by Israel over the last 75 years. And again, the people that Hamas massacred were peace activists. They were the people on the border trying to do community gardens and peace initiatives and employ Palestinians and all of this, right? But Palestine they don't want that. They don't want that. They want from the river to the sea. They want Israel. They've been offered a state 5 times. They've refused every time because that's not what they want. They want the entirety of the thing, and they want to kill all the Jews. Like the Houthis say in Yemen, where their national charter is, we will, death to, their national charter is death to Israel, death to America, death to Jews all over the world. So, and yeah, Temple saying, what if they state over and over again, they don't want to be in your civilization? They don't. They don't. If they wanted to, they would have been a long time ago. Shebrew says to Eric, Israel has done that numerous times. I don't live there and I feel like they can't. Too many lives have been brutalized and snuffed out. No more. I agree. And it's very sad, but it's not as sad as letting them get their way, which would be to do a real genocide and exterminate the Israelis that live there, which they tried to do on October 7th. So, what dehumanizing rhetoric? What dehumanizing rhetoric are you talking about? Saying that women and children are terrorist combatants when they are? What are you talking about? It's not dehumanizing to state the truth. Did I say they weren't not human? Well, I did say that the people that crossed the fence on October 7th were not human, and if they are active terrorists, no, they're not. Deal with it. They've chosen the demonic. They have chosen to be less than human. Therefore, they will be treated as such. Someone says, Gen Z mostly doesn't have a memory of 9/11. It is not that weird to make off-color jokes when young. For them, it's just another thing they heard a teacher yapping about. I wouldn't be so forgiving these days, particularly when they're sharing bin Ladens. Slim Jim says, I still don't understand how Hebrew and or Judaism ties into magic. Really? Oh, why Kabbalah? Hello? Is this Kabbalah? Hebrew is the sacred language of the West. And the Western civilization, so much of it has been created by Jews, right? The Western esoteric itself is a product of Sephardic Jews coming into Spain in the 12th century and bringing Kabbalah. Period. The end. On Isaac Luria, right? So Hebrew is the sacred language of the West as Sanskrit is of the East. Yeah, Judaism has a fairly large role in Western esotericism. Zimzum Aleph says, there's also a deep historical and philosophical connection between Palestinianism and Nazism. Yeah, absolutely. This is something that people aren't aware of. I thought it sounded kind of over the top when I first heard it, but no, it's real. Hitler was in talks with the Grand Mufti in Palestine, right? The Grand Mufti of Palestine was encouraging him to kill Jews. Netanyahu has gone so far as to say that the Holocaust was his idea. I don't believe that. I'm not sure that checks out historically at all. Or that he encouraged Hitler to kill them instead of sending them to Madagascar or Palestine, which were earlier plans. I don't know about that. But what is definitely true is at the end of World War II, tons of Nazis went to the Middle East to work on rockets to attack Israel. Tons. And there are clear links between neo-Nazis and the Palestinian thing now, because, is wearing a swastika in public socially acceptable? No. Is wearing a Palestinian flag and saying free, and if you go out in public and say you're a Nazi and you want to kill all the Jews, how's that going to go? Not real well, unless you live in certain areas. If you go out into public and you say free Palestine, from the river to the sea, now it just sounds like you're a nice person, but from the river to the sea means it's killed all the Jews in Israel. That's what it means. So you can see how they're ideological fellow travelers. And for instance, even Gaddafi was, this isn't Nazis, but Gaddafi was supplying tons of weapons to Western terrorists. And, it's like in the dark side of society, there is a dark side of society where you have terrorist networks, where you have pedophile networks, where you have neo-Nazi groups, and you think they don't talk to each other. You don't think there's interchange in those inner hells. But there's absolutely connections between Palestinianism and Nazism. All right. Eric says, a long time ago I made that comment. Okay. Eric says, I'm saying that someone can be an enemy without the need to say they aren't human. Oh. But I'm saying they're not human because they're not human, not because they're the enemy. I'm saying they're not human because of the choices they've made. If you take Captagon and you go butcher and rape a woman and hammer nails into her vagina while she is still alive, and you live stream it, you are not a human being. You have lost your card, and it is in your best interest to move on to your next incarnation right fucking quick. Period. The end. And I will not move on that line. Elizabeth says, for all my issues with the Catholic Church, the Catechism has pretty solid pillars to determine if war is holy or ethical. Like to know more about that. That's interesting. Slim Jim says, I see that it does, but I haven't got that deep yet, man. Sorry, I'm a slow learner. Haven't learned the whole history of Western esotericism. Okay, yeah, no problem. Most of Western esotericism is based on Kabbalah, and Kabbalah comes from Judaism. So that's why. Enjoy the Show says, they didn't know which river and sea they were chanting about when they were asked. The college protesters, yeah. And Eric says, agreed, from the river to the sea is a murderous threat. Yeah, but it's one that is cloaked and sounds like, oh, we just want to be free. Yeah, well, okay, what does that mean? Yeah. Same with the Intifada. These people don't know what Intifada means, Or the Red Hands, was from the Gilad Shalit, I think was the name, debacle, which was where terrorists tore this poor young Israeli man to bits and then held up their hands with blood on them to show that they had killed a Jew. And now you have students doing this, right? Slim Jim says, what makes Hebrew magical versus any other set of symbols? Is it because it's the oldest? No, it's because every single character is laden with magical meaning that is from the Torah, right? So it is considered to be God's language. Chase says, accidentally said Jan 6 when I meant October 7th, not intentional. Sorry. Okay, yeah. Okay, so Sheber says it was the first alphabet. All alphabets evolved from it. I don't know if that's true or not. We would have to ask Grok. It would be Paleo-Hebrew if that was the first one. Let's ask Grok. And certainly cuneiform and Phoenician are quite likely older. All right. Yeah, Temple says the same folks who think October 7 terrorists are humans, as is the criteria to be human, also believe the dude in Connecticut who axe murdered and ate a homeless dude is still a person. Yeah. To be Homo sapiens, you can be Homo sapiens by birth, but you're not a human being unless you make yourself one and stay a human being. Yeah, when you act inhumane, human cards. Okay, so the first alphabet, wait, let's see. Okay. The first alphabet is generally considered to be the Proto-Sinaitic script, which emerged around 1850 BCE in the Sinai Peninsula, located in present-day Egypt. This script is believed to have been developed by Semitic workers, who adapted Egyptian hieroglyphs into a simpler writing system to represent the sounds of their language. It consisted of about 22 characters, all consonants, okay, making it an abjad rather than a true alphabet with vowels, which sounds like Hebrew. Proto-Semitic is seen as the ancestor of many later writing systems, including the Phoenician alphabet, which appeared around 1200 BC. The Phoenician script refined and spread this concept further, influencing the development of the Greek alphabet, which added vowels and is often cited as the first true alphabet. So the Greek alphabet's the first true alphabet, and then that became the basis for Latin. So I'm just going to ask, where does Hebrew fit in? Well, if we're saying cuneiform versus alphabet, then Greek is the first official alphabet. Okay, Hebrew fits into the story as a direct descendant of the Phoenician alphabet, with some influence from its predecessor, the Proto-Semitic script. The Hebrew alphabet, as we know it, began to take shape around 1200 to 1000 BCE, during the time when the Phoenician script was prominent in the ancient Near East. Okay, so you had Proto-Semitic, which was developed by Semitic speakers from Egyptian hieroglyphs. And then later, you have the early Hebrew script, often called Paleo-Hebrew, emerged as the Israelites adopted and adapted the Phoenician alphabet to write their Semitic language. Archaeological evidence like the Gezer calendar, dated to around 925 BCE, shows this early Hebrew writing in action, closely resembling Phoenician letters in form and function. Over time, the script is used to record the Hebrew Bible and other texts. By the 5th century BCE, after the Babylonian exile, the Hebrews began transitioning to the Aramaic script, another Phoenician offshoot for writing Hebrew. So Hebrew's place is as a branch off of the Phoenician system, which itself traces back to Proto-Semitic, making it part of a broader family of Semitic writing systems that shaped many alphabets in the region. So I think it's not technically the first alphabet, but the first thing that looks like a modern alphabet is Proto-Semitic, which is Semitic and is eventually develops into Hebrew. So there you go. All right. Well, we can ask it to Slim Jim. Don't want Grok to tell me what to believe. We can ask another AI. Chat, I messed with Texas. My apologies. Oh, it's all good. Zimzum, Aleph, a yod above and a yod below with a vav separating and uniting them simultaneously. The secret of the image. I never realized that. Thank you. The secret of the image in which man was created. An example of Hebrew letter depth. That's profound. That's great. I didn't realize that. Aleph equals 1, composed of 2 yods and a vav, gematria 26, Yehovah, which is... Oh, what? Are you kidding? So wait, so the whole tetragrammaton is in Aleph? Wow. So, 2... God damn. Nice one. Nice one. Nice one. Nice one. Much respect. That's awesome. Thank you for telling me that. I had no idea. That's incredible. Shebrew, the book Spell of the Sensuous, talks a lot about Hebrew and the evolution of alphabetacy. Cool. And Zimzum says Israeli coins have Paleo-Hebrew written on them. Sinaitic as in Sinai. Okay, so Elizabeth says the quoted principles on determining if a war is holy by the Catholic Church is 1, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, or certain. Yeah. 2, all of the means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. And 3, there must be serious prospects of success. So that checks out as far as I'm concerned with the Gaza conflict, particularly if the international community gets out of their way. Amon Hillman claims the Bible was originally written in ancient Greek. I don't know. Oh, and then 4, the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. Well, so people, I think, might argue that point on Gaza, but when you realize that they're backed by Iran, which is a nuclear power, and that's the real game, that the real game here is Israel and America versus Iran, and the Ayatollah, who is... Thanks Obama, can easily attain nuclear capability if Israel doesn't stop them now, which they must. If Israel does not stop Iran, or we don't, if Israel doesn't stop Iran, we will have to. And if we do, and that will be worse than Iraq and Afghanistan combined times 1,000. That will be awful. And so we're talking, like, do you really want the Ayatollah Khomeini to have nuclear weapons? That's fucking bad. Do you want an ideological actor on that level of insanity to have nuclear weapons? You think North Korea having nuclear weapons is bad? Yeah. Aleph contains the name in itself. Incredible. Incredible. And then finally, this will be the last question. I've been on way too long. Jason, have you heard about the new structures they found under the Giza pyramids? I did see that. I saw they were using some type of satellite or sonar imagery, and they found what they were claiming were whole cities underneath the pyramids, which is definitely fascinating. But also a lot of experts have come out and said, no, this was not done to scientific protocols, and we don't recognize this as accurate. So we'll see what happens. All right, everyone. That's going to be it for me. I'm losing my voice. That's The Age of Reason. Let me know in the comments what you thought, other books you might be interested in. I'm going to get off.